Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to quickly thank Ideas and IAPS for inviting me to this conference, and to be on this panel principally perhaps to act as a buffer between numerous possibly contending factions. I don't think I can do that somehow. Since we've been instructed to keep our presentations short and brief, I'll do away with the caveats and try to zoom into the key points this session has been asked to address. First, the seemingly thorny issue of liberalism and faith, particularly in what is often described as a plural society like Malaysia. What liberalism is, has been, and I believe will continue to be discussed in other sessions today, from John Locke's belief in the individual's right to life, liberty, and property, to the more encompassing assertion that liberalism as a political philosophy supports ideas and programs such as freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, and civil rights. But what is liberalism, particularly political liberalism, largely seen as in the context of contemporary Malaysia? From the way our political leaders, our religious pundits, some of our mainstream media, and even our education system have begun to put it, liberalism seems to have shifted from being seen as something neutral, positive even, desirable even, to something that is negative and not suitable for Malaysian society. This is similar, I would say, to the way democracy was criticized in the 1980s and 1990s as being an invention of the West, a tool meant to continue to subjugate us to Western interests. Then there's this concept or assumption of a plural society. Despite the many valid scholarly critiques of this description of Malaysian society, it is one that still enjoys white currency. Pluralism implies equal, competing voices and centers and a free market of ideas competing in a fair environment. This, for quite some time now, has become rather doubtful in Malaysia. Competing voices, ideas, and practices, there certainly may be. But it would be unwise, indeed delusional, for us to believe that they exist in a fair environment. In many cases, there is no level playing field. Take the media system in Malaysia, for example. Since the 1980s at least, there has been oligopolistic control over the mainstream media, where the tentacles of the ruling parties, particularly UMNO, are spread far and wide, ably aided by the virtually all-encompassing 1984 Printing Presses and Publications Act and the increasingly abused 1998 Communications and Multimedia Act. It used to be said, especially in the bad old days of the Internal Security Act, that there is freedom of speech in Malaysia, but no freedom after speech. But now, despite a short period of respite, it would appear that even such limited freedoms are being taken away by what appears to be a desperate regime that blocks news websites that provide crucial information, suspends publications that don't toe the line, and detains respected, flea-bitten journalists for no valid reason save to intimidate them and others. It is also hardly a fair environment when you look at the state education system, one that provides homogenized fare for the masses, arguably with the aim of dumbing our children down rather than liberating their minds. Then, of course, there's the judiciary, once reputed to be one of the finest and fiercely independent in the region, if not the world, but for many now, the less said about, the better. And when we locate what I would kindly call this mess within the wider context of a political economy that is rife with practices that scream inequality, I think we would find it quite difficult to call ours a plural society. Recognizing the lack of plurality in Malaysia allows us to ask a number of questions of the term faith. Is there plurality of faiths? If there isn't, which faith dominates? Whose version of that faith dominates? Does this dominance lead to a benign situation where other faiths are not only recognized and tolerated, but more importantly, are seen as legitimate and respected? If it doesn't, is it the fault of the faith itself, the followers, and or the keepers and controllers of the faith? Hence, recognizing this non-plurality or inequality of the position of different faiths enables us to recognize power relations. In this regard, let me address some of the main issues raised by the organizers of this panel, at least in the flyer I received. First, the myth of Malaysia being a liberal society. Freedom of speech remains a myth when we have, among others, the Sedition Act, the Prevention of Terrorists Act, the Printing Presses and Publications Act, and now Section 124C of the Penal Code, so-called attempting to topple the government. Second, there's this myth of equality before the law. Opposition politicians, civil society members, dissidents are hauled before the courts. Civil servants are ordered to remain silent. More recently, top civil servants have not only been silenced, but also have been removed from office. Third, it is not the purported greater freedom that the liberal society provides, but it is the lack of a liberal environment, which is clearly the situation in contemporary Malaysia, that is leading to greater polarization, the construction of narrow ethno-religious silos, hence the lack of exchange between different, aggrieved, indeed oppressed groups and communities. Divide and rule evidently is still the mantra. Within this environment, greater exchange, greater understanding, which can only come out of acknowledging and respecting each other, not greater control, political, cultural, religious, ethnic, is, I believe, the only way forward. If genuine liberation, genuine participation by societies, Malaysian societies members, is what is envisioned. It is freedom that is required, not control. Second, can liberalism survive in a plural society? Again, it would depend on power structures and power relations within that society. When there's economic inequality, can there really be cultural pluralism, we may ask. It also depends on the people and how they see liberalism. Third, is liberalism incompatible with faith and religion? It really depends on what one's perception of one's religion and its role in society is. For me, it's a choice between liberation, the freeing of human beings on the one hand, and control. Sure, there are gray areas in between, but right now, unless there is political will, which I see very little of among our ruling politicians and the apparatchiks in our religious organizations, our education system, and certainly in our media, we appear to be drifting towards greater repression than liberation. Faith and religion are being manipulated by this class of individuals to legitimize their controls, to further their self-interest, and in so doing, aware that liberalism, if not something more radical, would indeed challenge that hegemony, defy their control. Certainly those dominating faith and religion in this country will certainly disparage, will certainly deride liberalism, or indeed anything remotely questioning their control. To conclude, I would like to leave it to a wise and certainly sad Malaysian, Philip Locke, former president of the Council of Churches of Malaysia, who wrote in the Malaysian Insider just a few days ago, in the aftermath of the UMNO Red Shirts rally of hate in Kuala Lumpur, and I quote him, "But for me, there is nothing we can boast of if my fellow Malaysians are living in fear of one another. There is nothing to celebrate if Malaysians are still differentiated by the color of their race and the faith in their hearts. There is nothing to rejoice over if freedom to live together as one bangsa is still a distant dream." Thank you. Oh, really?